Hey, what's up guys? Joel Adams with Iridesium, and today we're going to be taking a look at creating some electricity in Blender. This is a pretty crazy dynamic effect that will allow you to get a lot of different results with electricity. I've done a couple styles here. I've got electricity moving across the floor, and then I've got like a beam of electricity. However, you can create lightning and all sorts of other bolts of electricity with this effect. I should mention that the glow and color can be done right inside Blender. However, for the glow on most of these images, I used After Effects just because it's a lot faster and easier. Basically, what we're going to be doing is adding in some really thin planes and controlling the displacement that we will add to those planes with a separate object. So, with all of that out of the way, let's jump right into the tutorial and get started. I'm going to open up a new scene in Blender and hit Shift-A to add in a mesh plane. I'll switch to top view and delete the camera. Then I'm going to shrink this plane's scale quite a bit down on the Y-axis. I'm going to tab into edit mode before scaling it, just so that we don't mess up the scale of the object itself. I'll just hit S, Y, and then 0. That will collapse the plane down into basically two vertices. Once you go under the Tools panel and hit Remove Doubles, it will remove the two vertices that are overlapping each other, creating a single edge. Then I'll hit S to scale this object up a little bit so that it's longer. Next, I will go to the Modifiers tab. I will add a new modifier on this object. I will change its texture coordinate setting to be object instead of local. Back in the 3D viewport, I'm going to hit Shift-A and add in an empty. I'll just add in a plain axis empty, but you can add anything you want. This empty will simply be controlling the displacement, so as we move the empty around, the displacement of the electricity will change. Then I will select our electricity object, tab into edit mode, hit W, and select subdivide about 6 times until we have a good amount of geometry to displace. I'm now going to select the empty again, maybe move it off a little more. I'm going to switch the timeline down at the bottom to a graph editor, and we are going to animate this empty moving up. Back in the 3D view, I'm going to open the Properties panel on the right and then scroll up to the top where I will right click on the Z axis and select Insert Single Keyframe. Then down in the Graph Editor, I will add a generator modifier to this single keyframe. I'll just turn its strength down to something like 0.3 for now. I think I eventually end up turning it down to 0.2, however you set it at whatever works for you. I will now select our electricity object again, go to top view with numpad 7, and tab into edit mode, and extrude everything out on the Y-axis just a little. I will then add in the first modifier. This is going to displace the overall shape of our electricity. I am going to select clouds, turn its size all the way up to 2 and its depth all the way down to 1. I'll quickly turn the displacement modifier's strength up, and then I will go into weight paint mode where I will open the Tools panel, choose weight gradient. I will then paint in a weight gradient that moves in towards the center of the electricity beam. Once the gradient is painted in, I'm just going to select invert so that we have red in the middle and blue towards both ends. Then I will go to our displacement modifier and I will select the group we just painted under the vertex group setting. I will then add in our second displacement modifier. This is going to be some medium scale detail. It's going to be a cloud texture as well. However, I'm going to turn its scale down so that it's not quite as big as the last one. Then back in the modifiers panel, I will select the vertex group we just painted for this displacement modifier as well. I'm going to really quickly just tab into edit mode and scale this electricity down on the Y-axis a little bit so that it is not quite as thick. I will next add in a subdivision surface modifier on this electricity beam just to give us a little more geometry before we place the final displacement. Then I will add in another displacement. It will also be a cloud displacement. We're going to turn its size down and its depth up. For the texture coordinate type on this final displacement, I will choose Object and choose the same empty that we had. However, I will not select the vertex group we painted, as I want this detail to be on the entire electricity beam, not just on the middle. I will now hit Alt-A in the viewport just to view how our electricity is going. However, it does not look like I have selected the empty for the object coordinate under our first displacement. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that now. And playing back the animation now, you can see that it has changed the whole look of the electricity beam and made it look a lot more believable. So for me right now, I'm going to choose only rendered under the properties panel and switch to Blender internal. I'm going to quickly hit Shift A to add in a camera. I will hit Control Alt Numpad 0 to align it to front view. Next, I will select our electricity beam and add a new material. I'm going to check shadeless so that it is basically pure white and there's no shading on it. Surprise, surprise. Then under the properties panel, I will scroll down and switch from multi-texture to GLSL. Down under shading in the properties panel. Then I will hit Alt Z in the viewport to switch to Blender Internal's kind of pathetic real-time rendering. And then I will hit Alt A just to view the electricity and its animation, and you can see that it looks pretty good already. It's getting there, and with some more tweaks, I think it should look fairly realistic. I'm just going to hit Shift left arrow to go back to the start of the animation, select the empty object, go into the graph editor, and I'm going to turn the generator modifier down to 0.2. And then turn the sound up a little bit there, I guess, to listen to some music. Next, I will switch to the side view with numpad 3 and hit Alt D to duplicate our electricity beam. I will hit R to rotate it a little bit so that it's at a slightly different rotation. Once I have rotated it out a little bit, I'm going to then select the empty, which is controlling the electricity's displacement right now, and hit Shift D to duplicate the empty. I will then move the empty off to the side a little bit so that it is in a different location than the first empty. I will select the second electricity beam. I will switch out the controller object for its texture coordinates to be the second empty. And now moving out to the side a bit, you can see that we have two completely different electricity meshes that are still linked. I will then do this once again, just duplicating the empty, duplicating one of the electricity beams, rotating it a little bit, and then assigning that beam to the other empty. And now switching back to the camera with numpad 0, you can now see that we have three unique electricity meshes that are being displaced and creating a pretty cool detailed electricity beam. Next, I'm going to hit Shift A to add in a mesh cylinder. This is just going to be an object sitting at both ends of the electricity beam, just to make it look like the electricity is coming from somewhere. Then I will hit Shift A and add in a point lamp. If we were using cycles, we could just turn the emission value for these electricity beams way up and have the electricity cast light in the scene. But because Cycles is a little slower than Blender Internal, we're just going to be controlling the light in the scene with a point lamp, basically in the middle of the electricity beam. Not quite as realistic, but I think we can get away with it. You can add a keyframe in Cycles on the lamp. However, that keyframe will not carry over into Blender Internal. So if you want the lamp to be animated in both engines, you have to do it manually. So I'm just going to switch to Blender Internal, add the keyframe to the point lamp strength, and then add a noise modifier there. After setting up the point lamp, I'm going to hit Shift A to add in a mesh plane. I will drag this down to the basically where I want the floor to be and scale it up. Basically, you just want to scale it up big enough so that the plane goes into darkness before you see it cut off. Then I'm going to go to the world settings and set it to completely black. I will then add in another point lamp. I will put it up above everything just so that we can get some light on top of our two cylinders and sort of tell what shape they are. I'll turn this lamp's strength way down, and then I'm just going to work on the flicker of the point lamp a little bit just so that it's not flickering too much. You don't want it to be like blinking on and off because that will just get in people's faces and it will be hard to see the scene. You also don't want it to be too bright, as the glow, if you add the glow in After Effects or external software, it is going to make the floor glow a little bit too, and you don't really want that. After setting up the point lamp, I'm just going to tab into edit mode on the cylinders And I'm just going to bevel the edges a little bit to make it look more realistic. I'm just hitting I to inset the face on the front, and then dragging it out a little bit. Then I'll hit smooth shading, which will give it sort of a weird look. Instead of adding a subdivision surface or an edge split, I'm just going to tab into edit mode and drag some loop cuts up to the other loop cuts, just to tighten it all up. This will look the same as though we had added a subdivision surface. It is just a lot lower resolution. Even when you are not building a model for a game, I suggest using as little resolution as possible. Some people get like millions and millions of vertices in their scene, and when it's really not necessary. And so I would always try to go back to using as little resolution as possible, so that later when you open up that old file, you can tell what everything is and what's going on in the scene. Anyways, after setting up those two cylinders, I'm going to add in a second set of cylinders. These are just going to be some bars holding the first cylinders out to look like so that the first cylinders aren't just like floating in space. I have the object data on these two cylinders linked, so whatever I change on one will automatically update and be changed on the other. To do that, you just hit Alt D instead of Shift D when duplicating it. And next I'm going to just add in a texture on our floor. It's just going to be this sci-fi floor pattern, just to make it a little darker and so that we don't get a big glare on the floor that also glows when we add the glow in After Effects or whatever. And then I'm going to hit render, and once things are looking good, once I have textures on the floor and some grunge maps on our cylinders on the sides, just so they don't look so fake, I am going to hit animation and wait for the animation to finish. I also animate the camera moving in just really slowly toward the electricity to give sort of a dolly shot effect, which looks very cinematic and cool, and who doesn't want cinematic? There is one observation for this render: it's a little low poly. The electricity is not very detailed, so all you have to do is crank up the subdivision surface we added maybe a couple times, and that just gave the electricity a lot more detail and I think a lot more believability. Although what we did was create a beam out of the electricity in this tutorial, this effect is very flexible and you can use it for all sorts of things. You can even use it for lightning. Just pick a couple frames you like, freeze it, and then sort of duplicate the object to create your lightning strike. That just allows you to not have to trace an image for the lightning. You can also have the electricity crawling on the floor like this. Basically what I did was I just used a bunch of rigid body spheres being controlled by some turbulence fields, and then I parented each electricity mesh to one of these spheres, just using constraints. Then I added the displacements on top of that so that the electricity was sort of crawling around on the floor to give a pretty cool effect. Anyways, that's all I've got for you guys today. Thank you for watching, and see you next time. This is Iridesium. Bye.